Hi everyone, in this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at a game played by Garry Kasparov and Vladimir Kramnik. This was played in the 1999 Siemens Giants Rapid Tournament in Frankfurt, Germany, and without further ado, let's look at this game. Kasparov starts by playing e4, and now c5 by Kramnik, the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, and now knight c6, the old Sicilian. And here, Kasparov actually delays playing d4, and he instead plays knight c3. And after d6 by Kramnik, he plays d4. So now we have c takes d4, knight takes d4, and now knight f6. This is all very normal. White has a bunch of options here. He can go with bishop to c4, he can go with bishop to e2, he could even go f3 in some cases. But in this game, Kasparov decided to play the move bishop g5. And bishop g5 is the Richter-Rauser variation. And the Richter-Rauser was a very popular way to play against the Sicilian before other variations started coming around, like the Najdorf, or the Dragon, or the Sveshnikov. This is what people of the 20th century would mainly play. So after bishop g5 was played, Kramnik went e6, getting his knight into a pin, true, but he will break the pin with the move bishop to e7, so it won't make much of a difference. Queen d2, and now a6. So Kramnik just stops the idea of knight b5. And now we have queenside castle by Kasparov, and now Kramnik just kicks the bishop back to h6. Bishop to e3, and now bishop to d7. So normal development. f3, and now b5. And here, Kasparov decides to capture the knight on c6. Now, if you ask many people why you should not let this position occur, where, let's say, instead of f3, Kasparov captured the knight, why this position should never be played is because after b takes c6, you've simply given black an amazing center, and if Kramnik can get the move d5 in, he'll be more than better. So Kasparov does not want that to happen, and also another con of playing knight takes c6 is that it opens the b file up, and the major pieces can use this to their advantage. So that's not going to work. So instead of knight takes c6, we have f3, and after b5, knight takes c6 is played because there's no way that the pawn can capture, open up the file, and also give black a big center majority. Now the bishop has to capture, and okay, yes, you do get the c-file opened, but that's not a problem. Knight e2 was played by Kasparov, just trying to reroute his knight to a square like d4, maybe f4 in some cases, and queen c7 by Kramnik, just normal development, and after king b1, Kramnik just brought his bishop back to b7. So h4 by Kasparov, he's preparing ideas like g4 and g5 later on, in the case that perhaps Kramnik wants to castle kingside, although that is a terrible idea because, I mean, first of all, he's created a way that Kasparov can easily attack him, which is the h6 pawn. If g4 and g5 is managed to be played, then this practically forces Kramnik to take. So rook c8. Kramnik doesn't bother too much about this. He's just going to finish all of his development. Rook h3, and now because the threat of g4 is coming, Kramnik just stops it with h5. So we have knight d4, just bringing the knight into the center. Knight d7, and now bishop g5, just preventing moves like rook to d8. And here, a move like bishop to e7 is something that Kramnik most likely wanted to play, because if he can play bishop e7, then he gets all of his development done. He can essentially artificially castle, and he is going to be safe, and he's going to unleash his attack on the queen side, and Kasparov will do the same on the king side. But here we have g6, and the sole purpose of this g6 move is to fianchetto this bishop. But one might think that this is a terrible move, and I would agree with them, because g6 creates too many dark square weaknesses in black's camp, and with all of them able to being utilized, Kasparov stands better. I mean, he has a dark square bishop, and okay, Kramnik does too, but if Kasparov can trade the dark square bishops off, it's going to be more favorable for him than Kramnik. So, rook to h1. Kasparov is assuming that Kramnik is not going to castle kingside, as the position is already very dangerous if Kramnik were to castle kingside. So, Kasparov, assuming that he wouldn't castle kingside, is preparing to bring his rook back to square like e1. d5, and now e takes d5, bishop takes d5, and now bishop to f4, retreating the bishop, and also just attacking the queen. And here we have just queen b7, moving the queen and overprotecting the bishop. And now knight to b3, just moving the knight back. It is unleashing these major pieces on the d file, so that is a plus. And now we have bishop g7 by Kramnik. And Kramnik is trying to feed and shadow his bishop, and of course, if he can castle, then that would be great. I mean, Kasparov is not going to find an easy way to attack, and Kramnik can hold the position. But Kasparov is, of course, not going to let Kramnik castle like that. So he plays bishop to d6, preventing Kramnik from castling, and now we have queen c6, attacking the bishop, and here bishop a3. And in this position, we could say that Kasparov is definitely better. His bishop is preventing Kramnik from castling, and Kramnik still needs to develop his last piece, and that is his rook on h8. And he's having a lot of trouble doing that. So we can see that Kasparov definitely would stand better in this position. Knight b6 by Kramnik. Kramnik is getting ready to put his knight on a square like c4, and he'll definitely be better, because that would kind of force Kasparov to give up his light-squared bishop, since otherwise there is an option of knight captures a3, and, well, Kramnik would definitely be better in that case. So, bishop d3, knight c4, b takes c4, knight d4, attacking the queen, and Kramnik does not want to play bishop takes d4, because he, first of all, after bishop takes d4, would just weaken his dark squares severely. And second of all, his bishop on g7 is essentially the only good piece. And if he trades it for that knight on d4, then he's not going to be having a lot of fun. So here I have queen b6. And instead of moving the knight, because Kramnik is kind of threatening queen takes d4, and he would trade all the queens off, and that would be good for him, Kasparov just plays queen g5. And the queen g5 just comes with the fact that if you capture this knight, then you are getting mated on e7. So we have, instead of capturing the knight, bishop f8. And now you have an exchange of bishops, and now rook he1. So Kasparov is definitely better. Kramnik's bishop on d5 is a very good target, and Kasparov, he's developed all of his pieces. He's brought all of his pieces into the game. Kramnik does have all of his pieces developed, technically, since in some cases this rook on f8 could be considered developed. But it's harder to prove that Kramnik actually has something compared to Kasparov. So here we have rook to b8, just threatening checkmate on b2. And now we have b3, just preventing that. Rook to d8, Kramnik just goes back with the rook, since there's not really much that the rook will do on b8, so rook d8, knight e2, c takes b3, and now a takes b3. Now rook d7. Kramnik really wants to execute a certain idea here, and if he gets this idea in, then perhaps he's going to be better than Kasparov, if not winning. So the idea Kramnik wants to get in is bishop takes b3. And the point of bishop takes b3 is that if c takes b3 is played, then black is actually going to be able to checkmate white. And after queen takes b3 check, white is essentially hopeless. King c1 would lead into checkmate instantly after rook c8 check, king d2, and rook c2 checkmate. So like this. And king a1 would basically prolong it for an extra move, but still quite bad after king a1. You don't even need to capture this rook on d1. You can just play queen a3 check, king b1, and now just rook b8, king c2, and after rook to b2, king c1, queen a1. This is checkmate. So bishop takes b3 is the idea that Kramnik wants to get in. Unfortunately, this doesn't work because Kasparov has this move queen takes d8 check, and this essentially moves the queen away from the b6 square and the b file in general. And after queen takes d8, you play rook takes d8, king takes d8, and here you could capture the bishop. A line I find a bit funny is rook d1 check, just waiting to capture the bishop, because if the bishop blocks with bishop d5, then you can play c4 and that bishop is not going anywhere. So you're still going to win the bishop, and Kasparov being up a piece can easily convert this. And rook takes d8 check is the exact same thing. You would just trade all of the major pieces off the board and you would be winning the bishop on b3. So unfortunately, Kramnik does not get that idea. But with rook d7, he is preparing that idea. Let's say that for some reason Kasparov decides to play knight g1, a junk move. This would give Kramnik the opportunity of playing the move bishop takes b3. And why would this work when the original attempt of playing bishop takes b3 didn't? What difference did rook d7 make? Well, the difference it made was that after bishop takes b3, you no longer will be able to capture that rook with check. In the previous position, capturing the rook with check was a possibility, but now if you play rook takes d7, it honestly won't even matter. Here, Kramnik could even just play king takes d7. He could even just play bishop d5 check, an intermediate move, and after the king moves to c1, he can capture the rook. He is a whole pawn up, and he should be better in this position. So Kasparov must be aware of this idea, so he plays king to b2. Now bishop takes b3 will just be met by c takes b3, and now we have queen d8. Kramnik wants to trade the queens off because then that'll give him any attempt of perhaps surviving this storm. So queen f4 and now queen c7. This was the mistake, and the way Kasparov punishes this is quite elegant. So the better move after queen f4 was actually just moving this rook to g8. And it was the better move because after rook g8, Kramnik can just find refuge for his king on the king side. Unfortunately, that's not what Kramnik played, and after queen c7, he did pay dearly for his mistake. And I encourage you to pause the video and find out what Kasparov played that essentially just wins the game on the spot. Okay, so Kasparov played the move rook takes d5, and here there are three options for Kramnik, and all of them fail. The first and maybe most obvious one is why not capture the rook, and this is what Kramnik played in the game, but I'll get back to that move. Let's say you play queen takes f4 because you want to trade the queens off. Then this gives Kasparov the opportunity to play knight takes f4, and this opens up this rook on e1, and it pins this e6 pawn. So essentially, this e6 pawn cannot capture the rook, and after rook takes d5, knight takes d5, it's still the same story. You can't capture the knight, so you have to move the king, knight c3, and white is consolidated, and he is up a whole knight. The next option that you could try is rook takes d5, but that fails for obvious reasons, and that is that the queen is hanging. And the last option, which is what happened in the game, was e takes d5 by Kramnik, but this fails because of knight d4 check. And here there are two ways that Kramnik could go about this. He actually resigned in this position. He has two options, both failed though. He could play rook e7, just blocking the check, but that would lose the queen as the rook is pinned to this rook on e1. The other option is king to d8, but that's even worse because that allows knight e6 check, and you must move the king. And you must move it to c8, because if you move the king to the e file, then the knight will capture this queen with a discovered check, and then the knight will save itself. And the point is that you must lose the queen, because if you're a bit too greedy, then you're just going to get checkmated. After queen takes f8, this is checkmate. So there's no real way for Kramnik to respond, and in fact after this move he resigned, and a very nice victory for Garry Kasparov. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.